All right. Software requirement specification, SRS. Software requirement specification. What does the software requires to be built? What exactly it requires to be built? Okay, before it starts building, we are trying to find out what it needs to be built. Now, to understand the definition of requirement engineering, requirement is it's a process of establishing a services that the system should provide and the constraints under which it must operate. Like for example, if you are preparing a library management system, I don't know about library management system, isn't it? A librarian better knows about library management system, or some management knows better about management system, library management system. So that is what it is. So we need to provide a platform to the client or a customer who requires that software to give us their requirement. Unarko requirement ke cha, it has to come to us, isn't it? So it will be dealt through various mechanisms, like, isn't it? We'll have to follow certain guidelines, we'll have to do certain analysis, we'll have to do certain feasibility. Like if you want to prepare a rocket, if somebody says I want to make a software for a rocket, then you will not say, okay, go ahead, I can make it, isn't it? Because you don't have that feasibility to prepare a rocket. You will say that, okay, you go to ISRO or you go to NASA, then only rocket can be made. So you need to have a feasibility, you need to have a negotiation with solutions. Then we need to find out the specifications, final specifications, and then only that entire requirements will be transformed into certain operational system. All right. So that is what it is. So people say it is difficult. Why it is difficult? Because they are the two different parts. One is at one end and the other is extreme at other end. Because one needs something and the other understands something, or other prepares something and one needs another thing. So that is the basic behind requirement collections and actual designing. All right. So requirement is what the stakeholders or a user requires, and designing is what software designer, software coder has to sit and design. So there has to be a match. So that in order to create that particular match, it is little difficult, not difficult, but it is little difficult. We need to do so many processes. So under that, you may have to go through various, deadlines, various boundaries, various expectations of the user. Then you may have to go for a incompleteness problem, because requirements will not be finished, isn't it? Man cannot stop to wish for anything. So man may say that, okay, I want my software to print me entire money, isn't it? Currency notes malai print गर्ने चाहियो भने it's difficult, so it doesn't complete. So for that matter, we need to have a strong negotiation between the user and the designer. So that is what is meant here. You can go through this, you can understand this, what it is. Then let us go to the process of requirement engineering. What does it requires? It requires inception, elicitation, elaboration, negotiation. You can go through this. Now let us see this diagram once. This diagram says it's a requirement engineering. What are we going to do is, we will first sit with the feasibility study, whether that particular project which Mr. X is talking about is feasible or not. Feasibility in the sense what? Feasibility in the sense in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of manpower, in terms of policies, in terms of decision making, in terms of hardware, software, whether it is feasible or not. We'll have to do the feasibility study. Now, once we do feasibility study, we do requirement elicitation. Once it is said that, okay, I can make that particular software, then you go and try and find out the requirement of the user from the user's end. Once it comes to the user's end, then you do specification. Then it has come to your end, isn't it? You do some modification to that. So this is a process that goes on, building a system model, building a user requirement. Then finally a requirement document will be prepared. That document is known as software requirement specification document, SRS we call it as. Okay, so you can go through this one by one. Inception भनेको idea निकाल्नु हो, just to find out the idea. Now elicitation is, there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of requirements. You just jot down all the requirements from the stakeholders. Then elaboration and negotiation. Once you come back with those requirements, you sit with your team and discuss and elaborate on that particular issue. गर्नु सकिन्छ सकिँदैन, के feature हाल्नु, के constraints छ, what are the behavioral requirement, what are the additional data functions we can provide. All that you'll have to discuss. Then once it is discussed, you have to go to again the customer's end and negotiate. Negotiation हुनु पर्यो. You have to talk a lot. All right. Then next is your specification. It's a once negotiation is done, once it is completely final, then what you can do is you can form a document. You can either form a document, you can have a set of models, predefined model छ, त्यो model चलाउँदा हुन्छ, certain mathematical calculations गरेर एउटा equation बनाउँदा पनि भयो, or certain scenario use cases बनाउँदा भयो, or simple prototype बनाउँदा पनि भयो. Alright. Once that prototype is made, once that SRS is complete, then you need to have a validation. What exactly is validation? Validation means whether we are doing it correct or not. What user needs is correct or not. That's what is validation. You can go through this. We have a validation verification in the other slides also. Then management. Final management, it requires lot of management issues will come when there is a change in any software. There is a change in any software, like feature change. Now I have created a requirement, but feature client wants to have a feature change. Now त्यो change गर्नु मागे भने के गर्नु पर्यो? That it should have a traceability. You have to go back to the origin of that particular feature. Similarly, source traceability. Similarly, dependencies. How requirements are related to each other and dependent to each other. Then you have a subsystems traceability. एउटा system र अर्को system, how do they interact with each other? Then you have interface. कस्तो interface राख्नु पर्ने हो? External, internal interface राख्नु पर्ने हो कि होइन? So all that is your management part. So with this 4, 5, 6 steps of requirement engineering, we will come to the final SRS document. So in that SRS document, the major chunk of it has to be given to the analysis, problem analysis, requirement analysis. Requirement आयो नि, now I need to analyze it. That's why there is elicitation. That means you have all the requirements at your end. You do analysis and go back. Keep questioning, keep talking, keep interacting with the users. Then only you will finally get the requirement specification. अब requirement specification बनाउने बित्तिकै you cannot say that yes, requirements are made and you can start working with the software. No, because you need to model it so that the other person also understands. So there is something called modeling. Okay, so before we go to modeling, you can just go through this methods for requirement elicitation. How can we do it? It's a process. So interview can be done, survey can be done, questionnaires can be done, task analysis can be done, domain analysis can be done, brainstorming session can be done, prototyping बनाएर सानो prototype लिएर गएर युजरसँग बात मार्दा पनि हुन्छ, and team of experts can visit to the client space for the observation. So it depends on the kind of project. Okay, so that's how I collect the requirement elicitation process. Now once I do elicitation process done, then I need to go with the modeling. That's what I was talking about. You cannot just have a document and say that requirement is complete. You must have certain models to be followed, because model follow गरेर के हुन्छ, अर्कोले पढ्नु सक्छ, because he also understands something called UML, something called natural language, something called GRL. That particular person also understands this diagram making models. So if model is given to him, it's better understood to the person who is reading your SRS. Alright, so modeling गर्नु पर्यो. Now in that particular requirement analysis, we have something called QFD, quality function deployment. What is quality function deployment? This means we are trying to translate the customer's requirement, customer's needs into certain technical specification. Certain software बनाउन try गर्छ नि, त्यसमा चाहिँ के हुन सक्छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ we can have a normal requirements, right, where the goals and objective of a customer can be reflected. You can have expected requirements. Okay, what customer does not want that, तर पनि हामीले दिन सक्छौं हैन, or exciting requirements, some beyond the expectations of customer को features also we can add it. So these three things you must remember. You can be a normal, you can give certain expected things, or you can give certain excited requirements. But then our main goal has to be, our management goal has to be concentrate on maximizing the customer's satisfaction. All right. So this is how we do it. This is a little technical. So you may not need to go inside this, but then you just remember this diagram because it's a house of quality. How do we maintain the quality in QFD? We need to do what first, then we need to do how. What? How would you do it? Kasari गर्ने? That you must know. Kasari गर्ने भनेबित्तिकै you must know that the relationship between kasari, how and what. There has to be a relationship, isn't it? Then you form a certain matrix that would say how are you going to do it, what are you going to do. Then you have a technical correlations and planning metrics. How are you planning? How are you planning to meet the clients? How are you planning to negotiate with the clients? How are you going to talk to the experts? All that technically एउटा metrics बनाएर त्यसरी काम गर्यो भने चाहिँ that requirement collection would be easier. Alright, so this is what it is. You can go through this QFD. Why QFD? Because we need to find out the value in the requirement of a customer. Customer requirement जेसुकै दिनु सक्छ नि हैन, but then we need to find out certain requirement that is perfectly required or needed for that particular client. Function deployment भन्छ नि यसलाई हैन, function थाहा हुनु पर्यो हामीलाई. Then हाम्रोमा data के कुद्दैछ त्यो थाहा हुनु पर्यो, information deployment भयो. Then what task, what behaviors the system is exhibiting त्यो पनि थाहा हुनु पर्यो. That's called task deployment. Then value analysis. Then value analysis in the sense there may be a lot of requirements. You need to value each requirement and provide certain guidelines to that. Then you have modeling. That's what we were talking about in modeling in the previous slides. Modeling कसरी गर्छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब क्लास बनाउनु, क्लास डायग्राम बनाउनु सक्छ है, use cases बनाउनु सक्छ. These are all modeling techniques. So we'll do that later on when we do practice the modeling, designing गर्दाखेरि we will know this. DFD बनाउनु पर्यो, data flow diagrams बनाउनु पर्यो है. Then if you want to have a how does it behaves, कुनै पनि एउटा activity आयो भने how does it behave भन्यो भने activity diagram बनाउनु पर्यो, state diagram बनाउनु पर्यो, sequential diagram बनाउनु पर्यो, swim lane diagram बनाउनु पर्यो. So all that is modeling approaches. Alright, that's what is written here. You can go through this. Then once it is done, you must have a verification and validation of all the requirements. तिमीहरूले बनाएको requirements has to be validated. Why it has to be validated? See, one stakeholder is there in the left hand, right hand there is a system, in between there is a requirement and design. So once stakeholder gives the requirement आयो हाम्रोमा, तर त्यो requirement right हो कि होइन, I'll have to validate. And त्यो requirement चाहिँ correctly हामीले mention, are we writing that requirement correctly or not? Are we following certain guidelines or not? We need to verify. So that's called verification. So at every steps, we are trying to verify. Coding गर्दाखेरि पनि we need to verify. I cannot just code it. Designing मा पनि I need to verify. I cannot just start designing it. And validation त्यसरी नै हुनु पर्यो. Validation is you go back and try and validate. Validation means are we have the right design? Are we doing the right thing? हैन, हामीले करेक्ट चीज बनाउँदैछ के त, रकेट बनाउनु भनेको छ, हामी रकेटै बनाउँदैछौँ के त, लास्टमा गएर त्यो के अरे खेलाउने रकेट त भएको छैन होला नि. सो द्याट इज कल्ड भ्यालिडेसन. नाउ हामी रकेट बनाउँदैछौँ तर हामी रकेट बनाउने प्रोसेस फलो गर्दैछौँ कि छैनौँ? आर वी फलोइङ द प्रोसेस द्याट विल गिभ अस रकेट, or we are following some other process and later on के हुन्छ हामीलाई गाडी पायो रकेटको बदली. So that is called as verification. So are we doing it right is the verification. Are we building the right thing is the validation. हामी करेक्ट मेथड युज गर्दैछ is verification. हामी करेक्ट चीज बनाउँदैछ is validation. Alright, after this is done through all the phases, now you can go with the designing. हैन, डिजाइनिङमा पनि त्यसरी नै भ्यालिडेसन भेरिफिकेसन गर्नु पर्यो एन्ड सिस्टम कोडिङमा पनि त्यसै गर्नु पर्यो. Now you must also know about the types of requirement. There are two types of requirement. एउटा भयो users requirement. User requirement means customers requirement. एउटा भयो systems requirement. Now customer requirement दियो नि, तर I may not be able to sit and start doing things because I do not have I do not have services. I do not have a system. I do not have a time. I do not have a resources. I do not have a manpower. Now that's a system requirement. All right. So user requirement is separate and system requirement is separate. Under that, you have something called functional and non-functional requirement. What are functional? Functional means it's a functionality of a system. It's a functionality of a system. Functionality in the sense the software must provide us a report, generate report. It's a function on the. It's a functional requirement भयो त्यो. तर software should be foolproof. Software should be secured भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ non-functional requirement हो त्यो चाहिँ. Alright, it's a non-functional requirement. Non-functional requirement means we need it, but that is not compulsorily to be added as a feature. तर यो त compulsory हुनु पर्यो. यो function भनेको काम हो. त्यो softwareले काम गर्छ कि गर्दैन. What are the work that software has to do is functional requirement. What are the, apart from that work, what are the other things software also is intended to do? Like constants, like security, like reliability, like response time, like efficiency. Like what kind of IDE are we following? We are following a rapid application development IDE, or we are following C++ programming. ये follow गर्दैछ. That is known as non-functional requirement. So both has domain requirements also. Domain requirements in the sense in a bigger system. We are talking about in a bigger system, not in a part by part system. We are talking about a bigger system. Domain requirement. Domain भनेको ठुलो एरियामा के चाहिन्छ, सिस्टम रिक्वायरमेन्ट के छ र नन फङ्सनल फङ्सनल रिक्वायरमेन्ट के छ. सो I have a chart here. You can go through this chart. All about non functional requirement. के चाहिन्छ त भन्दाखेरि security requirement, regulatory, ethical requirement, environmental requirement, accounting requirement, safety security चाहियो हैन, त्यो सफ्टवेयरको लागि space requirement चाहियो. All that is known as non functional requirements. Now once I do all this, we generate something called software requirement specification. You can go through this. It contains a document. It's a document. So SRS is a document you need to prepare. After you submit the synopsis, SRS document has to be prepared. That contains a complete information of the project. It contains detailed functional descriptions, functional, non-functional, सबै हुनु पर्यो. System behavior हुनु पर्यो, कसरी काम गर्छ त्यो system, data कहाँदेखि कहाँ कुद्छ, validation हुनु पर्यो त्यो चिजको, and other suitable requirements हुनु पर्यो. That is known as software requirement specification, that is SRS. Now SRS, I cannot say that SRS I can just go and write down SRS. We must follow certain format. So IEEE has given a format. You can go through this format. Format is self-explanatory. You can see this. If you have any problem, you can just query me. I will help you out. All right. Introduction, purpose, document convention. What are we following? We are following IEEE. Product prescriptive के हो, product functions के हो, non-functional के हो, functional के हो, user requirement के छ, external interface के चाहिन्छ, हैन? All this is your standard format of SRS. All right. What are the characteristics of good SRS? You must remember this. It has to be correct. It has to be unambiguous. Please go through this. It's self-explanatory. It's a complete. It has to be complete. It has to be stable. It has to be modifiable. It has to be traceable. It has to be verifiable, and it has to be consistent. All right. So please go through this video. Try and go back and re-listen to it. If you have any query, as I told you in the morning, you can just ping me, or you can just send me an SMS or a WhatsApp message. All right. I'll try and explain there itself. Okay, bye.